God morgon och varmt välkomna till andra dagen av Aktiedagarna här i Stockholm. Vi har ett bolag uppe på scen. Det är Immunovia och presentationen kommer hållas på engelska av deras vd Jeff. Please welcome, the stage is yours.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here and to talk with you about Immunovia. It's also an exciting time to be with you and talk about the mission that we have, which is to increase survival from pancreatic cancer through early detection. This has been our mission for years, and we have never been closer to achieving that mission and starting down the path of commercializing our test in order to be able to detect pancreatic cancer early. I'll talk with you a little bit today about why that's so crucial and why that creates such an interesting investment opportunity in the company. If you think about the investment case for Immunovia, what's compelling about this company? And I think what you see here on the slide are several of the reasons that we see such strong potential in the company. First, there is a significant unmet clinical need in early detection for pancreatic cancer. Second, we've developed a proven, accurate blood test, and we have taken that test through the development process and are now ready to commercialize the test. So we've removed a lot of those risks that come with a life sciences company like ours. Even though it's been a very short time, we just launched 2 weeks ago in the United States. We've had a very enthusiastic and energetic response from the market, and I'll talk with you a little bit about that today. In fact, that's probably where I'll spend the bulk of our time. We're also making progress towards reimbursement. As you know, in the life sciences space, a key consideration is not just can you drive the volume and the use of your test or of your drug, but can you get paid by private insurers and by government payers? Finally, we're excited about the fact that we are going to be conducting a rights issue here over the next 2 months that will provide financing that will take us to the next key milestones in the life of Immunovia. I mentioned that there's a tremendous need for a test like ours in this space. Pancreatic cancer is an incredibly lethal and deadly disease. You can see here on the left hand of the slide that it is the third leading killer among cancers in both the US and in Europe. And that's not because it's very common. In fact, it's not common at all. The problem is that it's so incredibly lethal. If you're diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, your chances of surviving 5 years are just 13%. Why is that? It's because so often the disease doesn't show symptoms until it's already progressed to stage 3 or stage 4 cancer. And by then, the treatment options are limited and the survival rate plummets, as you can see on the right-hand side. If we don't find pancreatic cancer in stage 1 and 2, that person has only a 3% chance of surviving for 5 years. Unfortunately, today, because of the technology that has existed, we are not finding pancreatic cancer early enough. We only diagnose pancreatic cancer in that early stage, at stage 1 and 2, 20% of the time. That's the challenge that's in front of us. That's the opportunity, and that's what we can address with the Immunovia test. As I mentioned, on the 2nd of this month, we launched the PancreaSure test. It is a simple blood test that measures proteins in the blood that detect the presence of pancreatic cancer. You look and see here some of the attributes. This is a test that has been validated across 2 clinical studies. I'll show you that data. It is a simple blood draw, and it's much more convenient than the other approaches that are out there today for monitoring people who are at high risk. This is not a test that would be given to everyone. There are certain cancers that are common enough that everyone should get screened on a regular basis. Pancreatic cancer is not one of those cancers. Our target market are the people who are at high risk. These are people who have family history. They are people who have genetic mutations that put them at risk, or other conditions that would lead them to have a higher risk of pancreatic cancer. So having something that is convenient and affordable is crucial for these patients. Today, those high-risk patients, in many cases, are getting imaging done every year. That might be an MRI. It might be a procedure called an endoscopic ultrasound. These are procedures that are often done in a hospital. An endoscopic ultrasound is done with IV sedation, so you can imagine this is quite expensive. It's also quite inconvenient for these people who are at high risk. I mentioned that we have done 2 large clinical studies to validate this test. What I mean by that is to demonstrate the accuracy. And for a test like ours, there are 2 measures that really matter. What is the sensitivity of the test? Meaning, if there's cancer present, do you find it? And second, what is the specificity of the test? Meaning that if that person does not have cancer, do you avoid giving them a false positive result that would create fear and anxiety and lead to a lot of other medical procedures to confirm that that patient does not, in fact, have pancreatic cancer? We need to do both of these things. We need to find cancer when it's there, and we need to make sure that we're not sending false signals when it is not. If you look at the results that you see in the 2 studies in the graph on the left, we did a study called Clarity in over 1,000 blood samples, and then we did a second study called Verify in over 300 blood samples. What you can see is that when we were looking for those early stage cancers, stage 1 and 2 pancreatic cancers, we were very effective at finding them. That's where you see the sensitivity of 78% or 77%, meaning that for every 5 early stage cancers that we found, or that were there, we found 4 of them. We also had very good specificity. We did not send up false signals of cancer when it wasn't there. The specificity was 94% in the Clarity study and 88% in the Verify study. On the right-hand side, you can see how this compares to the technologies that are being used today to look for pancreatic cancer in these high-risk individuals. Endoscopic ultrasound is much more sensitive, but the reality is that's a procedure that requires going to the hospital, being put under anesthesia, and incurring the risks of conditions like pancreatitis that can sometimes come from having an endoscopic ultrasound done. More common is the use of MRI, and you can see that with MRI, the sensitivity drops and is only 50% sensitive for MRI compared to the 77 and 78% that you see with the PancreaSure test from Immunovia. Some patients are also given CT. You can see that accuracy, that sensitivity, and that specificity is similar to what you see with MRI, and again, not as good as what we achieved with the simple blood test, PancreaSure. We have gone through the development process. We've eliminated the product risk to a large extent. We've gone through the clinical studies to show that the test is accurate. It's now time to bring this test to market. That's what we did at the beginning of this month when we launched the test in our first commercial market, which is the US. There's a lot happening on this slide, but I think the key message is that if you think about the commercialization of our test, our goal is to do that commercialization in a stepwise way that allows us to invest appropriately given where we are in the process. I mentioned earlier that getting reimbursement is really critical, and it takes some time. Before we are getting reimbursement from private insurance companies and from the government in the US, our test will be a patient pay test. During that time, the amount of money that we get from that patient will be less, somewhere between $200 and $300. Conversely, once we are actually reimbursed by insurance, we expect that amount to increase to something closer to $900. So until we build up to that higher price and that higher revenue number, we want to make sure we're not over-investing in commercialization. Our initial commercial efforts will be focused on the key opinion leaders who are at top academic institutions. These are the people who see a lot of these high-risk individuals. They're also the ones who really drive the thinking and the practice in the space. So it's important during this first year that we drive advocacy within this relatively small group. There are about 200 of these high-risk surveillance centers across the United States. Our key metric for this first year is how many of those centers can we get up and running with the PancreaSure test. At the time of launch, we had 7 of those centers up and running. Just in the past week, we've added an 8th, which is the Immunovia Cancer Institute. You can see here some of the organizations that we're already working with. These are top institutions in the United States, and we will continue to add others as we go through the coming months. We have a strong pipeline of additional high-risk surveillance centers where they are doing this work every year to look for pancreatic cancer in these high-risk individuals. Here's a quote from one of the physicians who is using our test. Ray Wadlow is an especially interesting physician because he himself lost his mother to pancreatic cancer. She was just 54 years old. She was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer and died very shortly after that diagnosis. At that point, Ray committed himself to medical school. He committed himself to studying cancer, and he has a clear focus on early detection. He worked with us on the validation of our test and is now bringing it to market. He's just one example of the type of clinician that we're working with who's very excited about the PancreaSure test. We've also gotten very enthusiastic response from a lot of advocacy organizations who talk with and support the people who are at high risk for pancreatic cancer. You can see some of these groups on this slide. All of them have come out strongly in support of the PancreaSure test that we have launched. One of those individuals is Sue Friedman. She leads a group called FORCE, which is focused on people who have a genetic risk of pancreatic cancer. Sue is herself someone who has a genetic mutation that puts her at high risk. And as she notes here, that community is desperate for less invasive ways to screen for pancreatic cancer, simpler ways that put less burden on the patient. And as she notes that as an advocate, as well as someone who's at high risk for herself, she feels that this is a step in the right direction, an important development in the space. We've also made important progress in securing payment. This is a 3-step process. You can see that we have secured the first 2 steps in the process, and we will be seeking coverage, which is the 3rd step, to securing payment from Medicare, which is the primary government payer in the United States for people over the age of 65. From a financial standpoint, one of the things that we've implemented over the last few years is very close cash management. We manage our expenses very, very tightly and have done that for 2 years now consistently. We've kept our burn rate low despite all of the things that we've been able to accomplish, and we will continue to do that going forward, even as we are working through raising capital through a shareholder rights issue that will provide the company with 100 million SEK. That rights issue is guaranteed to 100% because of the investor interest that we've seen in this issue. In conclusion, we see tremendous opportunity in this market. We have a proven test that has been through the high-risk challenges of product development and clinical validation. We're now launching the test, and we've gotten a very strong response from the market. We're making progress on reimbursement, and we will, over the next 2 months, raise the capital that we need to take us to that next milestone and put us closer to our ultimate goal, which is increasing survival in pancreatic cancer. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Jeff. That leaves us some time for a few questions. First of all, what do you think will be the next step for you, and how far do you think that a broader commercialization is?
I think there are 2 key next steps for us as we look forward over the next 12 to 18 months. One of those is securing reimbursement. And as I mentioned, we have made progress on that path. The next step for us is really to share our clinical data with government payers and then with private payers to convince them that this is a test that they should pay for and reimburse. The second big commercialization step for us is to bring on a commercialization partner. I didn't mention that during the presentation, but as we move from this initial phase that we're in now, the advocacy phase, and really start to drive broader use of the test, we want to work with a large diagnostics company that already has an existing sales team. That will allow us to increase the volume more quickly. It'll also allow us to keep our expenses low so that we don't have to build out that whole sales team. So it's really those 2 things, the reimbursement and the commercial partner.
Okay. And regarding the reimbursement, you've been given this indicative pricing from CMS, around $900.
Yes.
I mean, how far do you think it is from where you get some clearance from Medicare?
So, as I mentioned, we've got to submit our clinical data. We are doing 2 small clinical studies now that will sort of round out our package of studies, and we expect to submit that early in 2026, and it's difficult to predict what the timeline will be for their review, but our goal is to submit in early 2026 for their consideration.
Yeah, and I mean, regarding, I've heard that there have been some layoffs in the FDA.
Yes.
How do you think this impacts you?
So it's an interesting question. In the United States, there are 2 different ways that a test like ours can be regulated. One is by FDA, which is the Food and Drug Administration. The other is through CMS, which is the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services. We are currently being regulated by CMS, the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. So the reductions in the FDA don't have a direct impact on us. We ultimately do want to get FDA approval for our test. We've had an initial conversation with FDA, and we're talking with them about what their requirements would be. But I think it's really early to say if the staff reductions at FDA would have an impact on us.
Okay. What do you think would be the major difference between having an FDA approval in comparison with the CMS?
Yeah, so one thing is that the FDA approval can be one additional thing that helps increase the reimbursement that you get for the test. That's probably the biggest advantage that we see.
Yeah. And regarding your go-to-market strategy, you mentioned that you'd like to go with the distribution partner.
Yes.
Yeah. Do you have any such discussions ongoing?
We do. In fact, I think that's been an important part of my role over the last 18 to 24 months is to start building those relationships. We know that those deals don't come together in a matter of weeks or even months. Oftentimes, you have to build those relationships. So I've had those discussions ongoing for quite a while now. Those companies are following our progress closely, and we keep them very up to date on where we are. Yeah. I think one of the realities is that given the market dynamics, those companies want to see tests like ours closer to reimbursement before they make that decision to say, yes, we want to partner. So I think the reimbursement process will be tied in with that partnering process.
Yeah. And if we look at the long term, of course, you mentioned that you have a scalable business model going with the distributor. Where do you think, at what margins do you think you can end up in if you go a bit further in the future? Where do you think you might end up?
Yeah, so we haven't disclosed our specific margins yet. And I think that'll be something that we'll think about as we get further into the commercialization. What I will say is that we have taken a number of steps to put ourselves in a position where we have a healthy margin on the test. I mentioned that this is a protein-based test. There are two advantages of that. One is a technical advantage. It allows us to discover the pancreatic cancer earlier. The other advantage is the cost. Our cost of goods sold is lower than what many other diagnostic tests are because they're using more complicated technology. So our goal is to keep that cost of goods sold very low so that there's sufficient margin, not only for us to do well, but for our partner to do well.
Yeah. And okay, if we move into early next year or so, what do you think investors should be look out for?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think for a company like ours, it's important that we communicate what does success look like. We've done that over the last 2 years where we laid out the product development and the clinical milestones, and we've consistently achieved those. I think as you look forward to the rest of 2025 and the first half of 2026, I think the real focus for investors should be, are we bringing on these new high-risk surveillance centers? Do we have experts in the field who are saying, yes, we want to use the PancreaSure test? That's how we are defining success, and I think that will ultimately be what drives our success in the years going forward. So that's the near-term focus for us, and that's where I would encourage investors to focus as well.
Interesting. And some closing remarks, perhaps. Where do you think Immunovia will be in 5 years?
So a lot of people ask us, what's next? Will you go into other cancers beyond pancreatic cancer? Yeah. And it may be an unusual answer, but I think the answer is that we will not. We see tremendous opportunity in pancreatic cancer, both because there's a clinical need and also because there are not a lot of competitors in this space. It is a wide open market that is ready for a test like ours and a company like Immunovia. Where I do see a lot of growth is in the penetration of the US market. That is a large, attractive market with good pricing. We also see tremendous opportunities in different international markets. Particularly in Asia, there is a large focus on early detection of cancer, and those markets have pretty attractive pricing as well. So we see that as a really interesting opportunity for us as time goes on. But certainly our initial focus is on the US, and I see for the foreseeable future, our focus will be on pancreatic cancer.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much, Jeff, CEO of Immunovia.
Thank you very much.